Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for the third edition of Finding Our Freedom. This week, we'll be discussing the US's buildup of military presence in the Caribbean, and particularly in and around my country, Trinidad and Tobago, who is actively and openly cooperating and supporting the USA's intervention in the region, but which is specifically targeted at Venezuela. Now, there are many issues at play here and many angles from which we can view these events. At the very highest level, this action by the USA against Venezuela can be characterized from a geopolitical perspective as a proxy war, as Russia and China are both heavily invested in Venezuela from an economic and military standpoint. There is also the humanitarian, legal, and moral angles which the USA and the government of Trinidad and Tobago has adopted. That this is a war on narco trafficking, human trafficking, transnational organized crime, and terrorism, causing a flow of millions of displaced people from Venezuela into Trinidad and Tobago and the USA. And then there is the geoeconomic angle of oil and power. Venezuela is at once possibly the most resource-rich country on the planet, but it is also one of the world's most unstable and impoverished, making it, in my view, the poster child for a phenomenon known as the resource curse or the paradox of plenty. The paradox of plenty predisposes resource-rich countries to subpar socioeconomic outcomes versus countries who have no natural resources, mainly because resource-rich countries tend to have extractive institutions and an extractive economic structure which promote corruption and kleptocracy. Now, this issue of Venezuela is a complex one, and possibly the most urgent issue facing our region at the moment. And many things can be right and many things can be true at the same time, which makes discussion and understanding of these issues and the risks we face in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean that much more critical at this time. And to help us understand these risks, I'm grateful to have Lieutenant Commander Norman Dindial, former Trinidad and Tobago military and Coast Guard career officer with over 26 years experience in joint and interagency-led operations, focusing on drug interdiction, migration, border control, illicit trafficking of persons, weapons, and narcotics. Lieutenant Commander Dindial is also fluent in Spanish and has developed bilateral agreements, strategic plans, and policies at the international level with Trinidad and Tobago's foreign partners. These include human trafficking policies and transnational crime strategies between Trinidad and Tobago, Colombia, and Venezuela. Welcome to Finding Our Freedom, Lieutenant Commander Dindial.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dukharan, for having me, and good afternoon to your viewing public, your regional players. And also, I'd like to say I'm very honored to be part of this program where we have one of our country's most respected regional economists and being able to chat with you and explain some of the issues that we're having in Trinidad and Tobago as it relates to the security aspect and how the security bolsters the economic resources. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commander Dindial. Before we get into the discussion, I just want to beg your indulgence and that of the audience, please, to share some important information on Venezuela and on Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean, just to set the context. And most of what I'm going to say is from a website and a report called the Global Organized Crime Index. So the first thing I want to highlight is that under the Petro-Caribe agreement that exists in the Caribbean and Latin America, Venezuela sold oil on a heavily subsidized basis to member countries, Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Belize, Cuba, Dominica, Dominican Republic, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Nicaragua, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Suriname. To the extent that when I did a study on this Petro-Caribe agreement in 2013, I found that back then, the level of debt owed by these countries to Venezuela was in excess of 20% of their GDP, apart from Suriname. And besides Guyana, nobody recorded and published these debt statistics officially. It was all off the books. So these are countries in the Caribbean that are heavily indebted to Venezuela. Now, according to this Global Organized Crime Index, excuse me, fighting a cough here, that index gives Venezuela a score of 7 out of 10 and rising to the 20th highest globally organized crime. My goodness, sorry, I'm losing my voice in the middle of this. Maybe I need to take a break. And Commander Dindial, I should probably ask you so that my voice recovers. Could you explain to us what exactly is happening? How much military equipment do we have built up in and around Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean from the US?
Well, the fact right now, we Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, the world has now shifted their focus from the Ukraine, the Middle East, into the Caribbean region. And that's because you have the largest carrier strike group. Now, carrier strike group, that which comes from a particular, a particular reference in strike group. A carrier strike group does not go in to do law enforcement. Carrier strike group goes in to actually very highly contested areas. And the United States has 11 carrier strike groups, and this is the largest carrier strike group with the most modern carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, largest nuclear carrier, and it's been brought repositioned from the Middle East, from the Baltic, and came straight into the Caribbean Sea. And with a carrier strike group, normal carrier strike group
Could I
comes
just
with.
interrupt you there 1 second, please, Commander Dindial? When you said nuclear, I was wondering if it was nuclear powered or nuclear weapons or both. Could you tell us?
So carrier strike group, it's a nuclear powered. It's a nuclear powered carrier. However, when a carrier strike group is moving, the first thing you don't see in a strike group is the submarines that have forwarded the carrier strike groups. You have two forward submarines called the Vanguard, and those submarines move forward in order to clear the sea space and the airspace. So this is like a hunter submarine to make sure that the carrier strike group goes into a place that is not threatened. When you have carrier strike groups moving and you have the submarines forward of it, then you have a destroyer squadron, right? And a destroyer squadron comprises of something like 4 to 5 vessel destroyers. Then you have missile cruisers right to the back of it. Then you have hunter mine class vessels. So it comes with everything ready for war. Now, in behind that, the back, you still have somewhere around, we're not talking about the nuclear submarines, which do carry ballistic missiles. But those nuclear submarines that carry ballistic missiles, they are all over in the theater without the world, and their position is highly, highly secret. No one knows where they are. So they could probably be in the Gulf, or they could probably be outside. We don't know where the nuclear submarines are, where that carry ballistic missiles. But I don't think at this point in time we have to look at that threat of nuclear ballistic missiles in the area. But we do have weaponry and systems that can destroy entire nations just by that carrier strike group. In fact, the carrier strike group itself has more weapons on board this guy than any country in the world. If you just Google it, have a look, that carrier strike group, USS Gerald Ford's amount of aircraft they carry and firepower is more than France and England combined. None of them have a carrier strike group. That's the amount of might that is actually in our area. And we're seeing now that it has moved, or the rhetoric has moved from narco terrorism to an international blockade of sanctioned oil and sanctioned vessels. So we're moving from a realm where the U.S. president was framing this as being contra drugs into their area. So it's narco terrorism and fighting drugs. And we have now moved to an active piece of UNI blockades. Now, a blockade, we have to take this into consideration that a blockade cannot be legal unless it is sanctioned by United Nations Security Council, especially in peacetime. That's important to note. We're not talking about that. Huh? So a blockade, United Nations do not will not give you a blockade. The Security Council has to ratify that and agree. So this blockade in peacetime is against United Nations law and against international law.
Okay, so if I understand you clearly, what the US action right now against Venezuela is category from what you've just said, an illegal act.
And you have
And
seen it being denounced by China diplomatically. China has stated diplomatically that this is they've denounced it, and we have always seen that the Venezuelans have asked for an emergency session um, with the United
emergency
Nations.
session
With
at
the
the
United
UN.
Nations, yes. So an
Okay,
emergency
okay.
session has been requested at the UN to speak about this blockade because if you can have a blockade during war
Yeah,
if you but this is peacetime and you're sanctioning a sovereign territory and having a blockade of um, always you're saying sanctioned, but everything that's sanctioned is not sanctioned by the United Nations. It's sanctioned by the US, by the US courts, by the US law.
right. So, okay, we have the legal aspect of it. And I was going to read some of what this index had, the report had outlining the challenges in Venezuela. By the way, this is sorrel, guys. This fix my throat. This is the best stuff. I don't care what anybody says. Sorrel is the best medicine. But
It is.
what I want what I wanted to say was, I mean, and I'll just highlight. Maybe it happened for a reason. I wasn't supposed to read all, but we know that we have serious concerns about the level of instability in Venezuela. We have more than a quarter of the population of Venezuela that has fled since since the early 2000s, at least, especially since after 2010. We have a lot of weapons and arms trafficking in and around and through Venezuela. We even have the Russians have built a Kalashnikov manufacturing plant that was launched earlier this year in Venezuela. We have the fact, and all of this is from this Global Organized Crime Index. Venezuela has become a key transit hub for cocaine trafficking and Colombian guerrilla groups operating there, criminal groups that carry out extortion in Venezuela, which, as you know, has become a problem in our country as well, in Trinidad and Tobago. On money laundering, we know that financial crimes are widespread in Venezuela. Only last year, the FATF grey listed them. They took quite a while, but we know this is a political list anyway. And Venezuela's gold trade apparently serves as a key vehicle for illicit financial flows globally. We have human rights issues and press freedom issues, where, for example, there's arbitrary arrest and detainment of NGO groups, of journalists, and also of opposition and dissidents. On corruption, we are aware that there is, from the judiciary to the political elite, accused of corruption, and basically there is no functioning judiciary. At least it is only used when it's weaponized against political opponents and shielding government aligned criminals. And on political crimes, we know that the last government is highly contested and alleged to have been subject to electoral fraud. And many international actors have rejected the elections' the illegitimacy. So I hear you on the legality side of things. We already discussed the humanitarian and moral side of things as it relates to human trafficking, drug trafficking, and in my mind, here's where here's how I see and when you break it down to brass tacks, let's just say, for me, in Trinidad and Tobago, as you would know, Commander Dindial, we have had a long-standing problem with narcos in our country. We even have a former finance minister who has said publicly that Trinidad is a narco state. We've had the Scott drug report since the 1980s that highlighted this problem and the extent to which it is infiltrating, the policy making as well as the police service. So we've had this problem in our country for decades that has sort of spillover back and forth effects with Venezuela. We're only, what, 7 miles away, right, from Venezuela. At what point do we say, listen, enough is enough? There's the legal side, but within legality, there is only so much you can do. There are instances and issues and circumstances that are not contemplated in the law, let's just say. There are issues like we outlined in Venezuela and in my country, our country, that has been so long standing, and the corruption and the pervasiveness of the narco trading is so intense that the legal avenues are very limited and ineffective against this monster that we're facing. What is your response to that in terms of what action should we take, could we take to address this problem, if not the current action?
So quite interesting enough that you would mention that Global Organized Crime Index report for 2019. You're hearing me well? Yes. So, but it would be remiss of me if I didn't point out that in that Global Crime Index, there's a comparator that you can use to show both Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. So I agree with you 100% of all the things that you have stated there, but it is not only isolated to Venezuela. Trinidad and Tobago has those same issues, those very same issues that you have pointed out. We have them, and the US also has those issues. Even and some of those issues pointed out will be in the US are even greater. And there's something here, I know the criminal justice and security system, and I'm just looking at the comparator because I have it up on my screen here. And under governance and criminality, it says Trinidad and Tobago's judicial system is considered weak and inefficient, hindered by corruption and political pressures. It also goes on to say that it's so much to it about the gangs and stuff, and that Trinidad and Tobago has financial institutions and casinos that fund terrorism. And this has also been reflected in the US's report that they put out on the embassy. We are flagged. We are number 5. I think we are state 5 right now, where the US embassy has put out that don't come to Trinidad and Tobago because Trinidad and Tobago has active terrorists. That's interesting, that you have the US saying that about us. And then we're talking about all these cartels and drugs and stuff. We have also have, if you do use a comparative and look at Mexico, Mexico has the biggest drug cartels in the world, the Sinaloa cartel, the Jalisco cartel. That's right on their borders. But they're not pushing, the US story is not pushing it there, they're pushing it into Venezuela. And I agree. We have the fallouts. So we're seeing the fallouts, but I would argue that the fallouts are more the symptoms. They're symptomatic of the disease, of the problem. So Venezuela, we're seeing all these symptoms because of the sanctions that were imposed by the US. That's my argument, in my opinion. The US's sanctions imposed on the Venezuelan economy has pushed Venezuela to be this way. And you find that fallout, Trinidad and Tobago is also being affected by those symptoms, because when the gangs move away from Venezuela, they are coming into Trinidad and Tobago, and we have migrants, we have people that are fleeing Venezuela. Yes, some of them persecuted, and the Venezuela is sanctioned by the UN, but for those particular crimes that you were talking about, extrajudicial, political, being taken in by the state, and not having a trial, and some humanitarian things. But the entire state of Venezuela, nor the oil production, has not been sanctioned by the United Nations. So I look at it, I understand that, but the domestic law, we are seeing the overflow of what has happened, where Venezuela has been pressured. Venezuela has been pressured. So you would hear saying, well, open the markets up a bit, give Venezuela the opportunity to come out it. And I guess the conversation will go now when we were talking about PDVSA and what really happened from the 1976 by the naturalization of the Venezuelan oil economy and what Chavez did. So I would agree with you in 76, I think it's 76, that they started with the nationalization of the Venezuelan oil market. And it did change when Chavez came in. So when Chavez came in with his regime, he saw PDVSA as that mechanism to fund his regime. So I will agree with you that that's where the change is. But the naturalization of Venezuelan oil and their state institution, it's nothing different that other countries have done. We see the president of Donald Trump right now saying that, and his rhetoric, that Venezuela owes the U.S. for land and state, the oil. So they're talking about that, and that will be coming. That comes with the repatriation of Petrocaribbean, not Petrocaribbean, ConocoPhillips, and the other oil company. But these two companies, it went to arbitration. There is an arbitration factor, and I think it's 6.1 billion dollars in reparations Venezuela is supposed to pay them. But Venezuela can't pay them because they had sanctions and they can't sell the oil. They can't get the money to pay them, and that's all legal things with two U.S. oil companies that they are not national oil companies. So by you arguing saying that this is U.S., this is not. It's a private company. It's private oil companies that you're fighting against. So when you say that, I think it's being disingenuous by trying to say that Venezuela has your stuff, but it's in the public domain, international courts, and Venezuela did go to court. They lost, and they still had to pay. So
Well, okay, so let me just step back a little bit. So you're saying that these problems that exist in Venezuela, as it relates to the socioeconomic collapse that caused the outflow of migrants, and that sort of gave birth to some of the illegal activity like illegal weapons and narco trafficking, has its roots in the sanctions that have been placed and the interference of the US in the functioning of Venezuela's oil economy.
that would be one of my arguments. Yes, I would say that the sanctions have been hampering them. So when you see the fallout from the sanctions, you have there's no money in the economy. There's no money in the economy. So it has forced them to partner with Russia and China. So you have Russia, China, and Iran who are partnering with them, and that's where Venezuelan oil is going because Russia is a producer of oil. Russia really doesn't buy oil. China purchases oil, but and Venezuelan heavy crude is heavy crude. So it's not really economical to refine Venezuelan crude locally because it costs more to refine the crude than to get the product because of that heavy crude. So they need other chemical precursors in order to lighten the crude in order for the crude to be viable. But the oil goes to China. They cannot trade with anyone. Venezuela cannot trade with us unless we get a OFAC license from the United States. But Chevron can still take oil because Chevron has the license from the United States, and Chevron is not sanctioned. Oil is leaving Venezuela, as it says right now, to the US by Chevron Oil Company. So we have companies that are able to trade, but they are US companies. The oil is going there, but you have other areas that can't trade with Venezuela because the US says they can't.
Okay, I can understand where you're coming from in terms of the sanctions having had an effect. But my position, like I outlined earlier about the paradox of plenty, I believe that Venezuela, like Trinidad and Tobago, like Guyana, we are countries that suffer from the resource curse. We are countries that we have a weak institution, an extractive institutional and economic structure that means that we are predisposed to things like corruption and things like, kleptocracy, which is, akin to corruption, and weak functioning of the social services that the state is supposed to provide. And we can debate which one carries more weight. Is it the paradox of plenty or is it the sanctions that cause? I'm almost not even that interested in how we got here as I am in how do we go forward. But in the going forward, what are the implications for Trinidad and Tobago? In my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, because of course I have no military expertise whatsoever. But when I look at this situation, part of me is very hopeful that the intervention that the US is conducting will hopefully address the narco trafficking, the illegal weapons movement, and the movement and human trafficking that has spilled over and affected our country for decades. I can't help but live in hope that this problem is finally going to be put to bed. I would like to hear your thoughts on, am I living in a false hope in La La Land? Or is there a possibility that this intervention can actually have positive effects for our country in terms of eliminating these bad actors and the things that they've been doing for the past few decades?
Quite bluntly and frankly, no. So you are living in La La Land, and I will tell you that. So it's left to be seen. But from my opinion, from where I sit, you are living in La La Land because we're framing it as narco tourism that's coming out of Venezuela. Venezuela does not produce fentanyl, and the major producers of all the drugs that we're using right now in the world, they're coming from Colombia and Mexico, and from the Panama, that whole region there, Ecuador. When we're not even talking about Chile and Peru, right? So you have the coca areas, and you have the regions that are actually making the product. But Venezuela does that. Venezuela is just transshipment right now when you look at the production of where drugs. So you're supposed to be hitting the
But the
countries that.
transshipment is a big deal. I mean, the transshipment happens through Trinidad and Tobago too, and the transshipment itself, even if it's not production, the transshipment is a problem.
The,
You're a
so
conduit.
so so that's what I'm saying. The transition is a part. But if you want, if anytime you hit the transshipment, the supply chain route, so you hit the supply chain route, but the drug dealers, you will find another route. So there are other so the production is it. You have to hit it at the source. You can't be doing. So I'm not saying it's not going to help, but it's not going to solve the problem. If you have to solve the problem by going to the source, and the source is the countries that are actually producing the drugs. The source of gun violence in the United States
And
is
consuming. The consumer is also a
oh,
big part of
oh
the
but
problem. If there
but
was no
that
consumer, there will be no drugs,
there
right?
was no demand. So I
Yeah.
so and the largest demand for cocaine is the
Global
U.S.
is in the global north for sure. Not just, as a matter of fact, I saw a study some years ago that looked at, they use wastewater and they test for various drugs in the wastewater. And you know which country had the highest drug consumption? This was years ago. Drug consumption per capita based on wastewater testing.
I would value a guess. I might think Great Britain,
It was Belgium.
Belgium.
It was on a per capita basis, but it was
Okay.
Belgium by based on testing of wastewater. But yes, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But yes, the production, you're right, is, if we don't solve that problem, then it's going to find its way to the global north somehow. But we have to deal with the production.
So the production is part of now. I did counter drug operations for over 30 decades, right? So my whole life I was doing that, and I worked at the international level, working with Interpol and drug cartels and cross-border crime issues internationally that move from Venezuela into Trinidad and all into Europe. So I just mentioned that there's some of these syndicates that we took down because we have been following the drugs for over 2 3 years, but targeting it to bring the whole institution down. So and these are Slovakian and Ukrainian elements. They're big crime lords that work across it. So the drugs still find their way. This drugs still find their way because where it is being produced, it's still there. It's being produced at a high rate, and no matter how much we cut the supply chains, they become these smugglers. They're very ingenious, and they will look at different methods. And sometimes you see they would. One of the things I saw that they would smuggle cocaine in beans. They would take a red bean, open the
Uh-huh.
red bean, and take out the dicotyledon and seed inside it, and just put a minute amount of cocaine in that and close them back.
Oh my
That's how,
God.
yes, that's the extent they go to send the drugs in the area. But we are seeing that we started with the narrative of narco-terrorism, and I could have agreed with that. I could have
Hmm.
agreed with that 100%. But when it started to fall apart with fentanyl, okay, it fall apart there, fine. but we started to still go ahead and said, here's what, we're going to attack the drug traffickers that are going up the islands.
Right.
But it wasn't law enforcement. You could have interdicted them, which we have done before in the past, shut out the engines, stop them, collect the evidence, find the evidence trail, and see where they're going. We have no evidence right now that these individuals that were targeted and killed going up the islands were actually taking drugs. No one knows because the evidence was blown up.
Was
So there was that
destroyed.
issue that
Mm.
there was that issue that you could have done that. So
Mm-hmm.
it was not law enforcement. It showed me as a person that was doing this that they weren't really doing it to catch the big fish, the bigger criminals. It wasn't targeting that. It was different. And coming out now, seeing that you have moved the goalposts to now it's sanctions, it's oil sanctions. And you have now stated that here's what um, Venezuela is owing us money, is owing us our oil and owing us our land. So you have moved away, totally moved. You have shifted 360 degrees from narco terrorism to that. Now, I'm saying it was in the link. You started that way,
Yeah.
but we are seeing that it's something different. But are they going to maintain the drug narrative? Are they really going to continue that? It seems not. It seems now that the buildup and the type of ships that are in here, it's about stopping the oil tankers now. It's sanctions. They're no longer focusing on this. So in between, you may get one of two of these drug boats again,
Mm-hmm.
but the focus has totally changed. That's my
And the,
concern.
mhm. And the thing about sanctions, I mean, you can look at Cuba. I mean, just nearly 60 years that Cuba has been under an embargo by the US, and has it caused regime change? It really has not. I mean, there's been there's been an evolution of that regime, but it's still
So,
fundamentally a
so,
communist regime.
that's what. So, President Trump has recognized that. He's recognized that sanctions don't work unless
Right.
there's enforcement. So he has moved from sanctions to an effective embargo. So it's an effective, active embargo. So sanctions is one thing, but an effective embargo, actually targeting the vessels, arresting them, taking the oil and taking it back to you, that's an effective embargo. But an effective embargo, you can't do that, as I mentioned before, without a permission or sanctioning from the United States the United Nations Security Council, especially in a peacetime, and that's critical. We're in
Right.
peacetime when war has not been declared by anyone. So you see, President Trump is using very intuitive mechanisms in order to go into the Venezuela without having to actually declare war.
So, if he's pressured by the UN, what do you think he would do? Would he stop, or would he then just declare war?
So, in my opinion, from what we have seen in the past, he has already told the UN that you're a toothless bulldog without the US's intervention and the US's
Right.
arms to back it up. So, and the UN is they're not doing anything about it. Even though they can make a lot of sanctions, they can say what they want, the UN Security Council, but it's out of the five veto nations, the US is one of the vetoes. So even if you go to the UN Security Council, the US has that veto power to say, I'm vetoing it. That,
Okay.
yeah.
So,
So
in effect, what you're saying from a diplomacy standpoint, the US can continue to take the action that it's
they
taking.
want, they can. But at
Right.
least in the international forum, you would have someone actually having it on record that this is here's what we're standing up. We have it on record. We're saying no to this. The US and then the US let the US veto. Let the US go ahead and veto, so we can say they are the ones that are actually pushing this victory. Because the
Okay.
UN cannot force the UN, as you see, the UN cannot force anything. They can't because the
Yeah.
US has veto powers.
So, okay, let's go back to, you've already established that I'm living in La La Land. There's no way that you see that this intervention by the US could possibly resolve the drug trafficking, narco problem, and crime problem that we have in Trinidad and Tobago.
Definitely not, because we have according to the report, we have a failed judicial system in Trinidad and Tobago. We don't have
Yes.
an evidence-based gathering. We can't do that. So when they started to tell me that, because I was in charge of the operations and training of the entire defense force and joint training internationally and regionally. But when you started telling me that you were bringing individuals here during a state of emergency to help Trinidad and Tobago with gang violence and drug interdiction, but you weren't training them on evidence gathering, you brought in the military, you did not bring in the institutions and organizations that had that capacity. So you did not bring in the DEA, you did not bring in the FBI, so you don't want the CIA, but you did not bring in those investigative bodies, the alcohol and tobacco and fire and brew. You didn't bring in these things from the United States, and you didn't bring in the Scotland Yard and stuff from the UK to help bolster your institutions. Because that's where you're failing. You're failing in the investigative process of evidence handling. One, because our detection rate is abysmal. We have a
Yes.
very low detection rate.
It's single digits in terms of percent. I think I remember seeing an IDB report somewhere around 6% and this was historical in terms of our
So
detection rate. Yeah.
it puts you in. So imagine, ma'am, we are in a state of emergency, and people are still kidnapping. You still have murders going on in the broad daylight. So you can't get a hold of your domestic problems. You can't get a hold, and you're telling me that this is about gangs. So we gave the police service and we gave the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force extra powers where they could go in and stop, detect, deter without a warrant, without a search warrant. But after the SO is lifted, you still need evidence in order to prosecute. So we have individuals here, about 26 individuals that are under detention orders, but they haven't been charged. So what's going to happen after? It's just this:
Mm.
if you haven't been charged, you're going to come up and they're going to go to court. They're going to court, and it's going to go through the judicial process, and they're going to be given a lot of money by the state. So the state is going to have to pay these individuals for illegal detentions for as long as time. So we need to fix
Well,
our
you
own
mean the
problems.
taxpayers, the
Yes, well,
taxpayers.
us.
Yeah,
Yes,
you and me
yes,
and
us.
our
So we have to
children
fix.
and
We have to
grandchildren.
fix that. So I see it as an institutional failure here by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. I mean, some people don't want to say so, and our judicial, but you have to come out, and if you do not own up to where things are failing, you will not fix them. You will only hide. So you have to come and say right there where they are.
So you're seeing no possible positive implication in all of this for Trinidad and Tobago. Please, just note that there's a few days before Christmas, and I was this was all of that. I was pinning all my hopes and dreams on for Christmas and New Year's
Uh,
on that. Hopefully these people come in here and mash up all of these narcos and we will be fine. But
Well, you see, the posture has moved, as I was reiterated, it has
yeah,
moved away from narco. The posture is
to
not there
oil,
anymore.
yeah, to
It has moved
oil,
to
yeah,
oil. So maybe if it was there, they would have
yeah,
helped us institutionally to help with our own gang situation. And we know
yeah.
that we have gangs here from Venezuela. We have individuals here that have come across the border, and they were serious gang people. So if Trendiaguas, people from Venezuela, came
Yeah.
across it, and they reside in Trinidad and Tobago under the radar. They're not registered. We don't know who they are. And and I'm not speaking about this from. We also had people from Trinidad and Tobago going across to Venezuela to be trained and move across the fight in Syria. We had that, and I'm not
Yes.
speaking about what
Yes.
I what, you know what I told. I'm talking about I myself had gone across with a contingent on a fact finding mission way back and we met with seven, and we saw all the documentation of the individuals here being trained in Venezuela to go across to Syria. So when you say we have foreign terrorist fighters of Trinidad and Tobago nationality that are going to Venezuela, so Venezuela knows, and Venezuela has a very, very good intelligence agency. It's called Seven, and when they see our actors there, and if the actors are not leaving Venezuela but staying there, not going out to Syria, why are they staying in Venezuela? They have a reason now to say maybe they are staying in Venezuela to do something in Venezuela because they're now interacting with other militia groups or other groups in Venezuela that is opposed to the Maduro regime. So you have that. We have Trinidad and Tobago actors. We just we're not we don't want to admit it. And that's why out of the last accusation, um, our prime minister did not send a fan facting mission. I would have sent a mission to go across and find the facts. but she didn't. She just said, "What are they saying? They're saying it's untrue." But diplomatically, you would have done that. You would have worked together. You collaborate, work together with nearest neighbor. Let me find out if what you're saying is really true. If Trinidadians are really there in Venezuela, and if they're really up doing this, and from there we move forward. But we didn't. We did the same thing like the U.S. We blew up the drug boats without any evidence. So you know,
Okay. Okay. So all right. I will have to come to terms over the Christmas with this new
I
perspective
don't.
that my country is not going to be any better off as a result of all of this.
So
But
here's the thing, and I'm not fear mongering, as I said. I'm
mhm.
not the optimist. I'm not the pessimist. I'm
I was
just
trying to be the optimist, yes. But yes,
yes.
let's hear.
Right. I'm just being the realist. We have a radar in Tobago. We are
Yes.
now complicit with the United States by allowing them to use our territory to resupply. So we are part of the United States resupply chain, right?
Okay.
So whether or not it's taking their troops here for them for rest and relief, or it's taking stuff, potatoes, potato chips, whatever on board the vessels for them, we are part of their resupply chain. If we are part of resupply chain, it means that we are one of those nodes in their active fight against Venezuela. So
Uh-huh.
moving forward, any kinetic strikes within Trinidad and Tobago's territory or even in international waters
Could you
makes
explain
us
what is kinetic strike,
a
please?
kinetic strike means a missile strike or a drone strike or a strike that with any sort of fire, something that you have a hit, a kinetic strike.
Okay.
So I don't
Uh-huh.
we use the term kinetic strike it's broad. So a kinetic strike, you could be going into land in Venezuela, you could be firing against a aircraft or something like that. So it's a broad term to say that you have
Okay.
actually targeted a Venezuelan asset or
Mm-hmm.
terminal, and you have hit it with a weapon system, or you have
Okay.
actually boarded, searched it, like the tankers. So it's
And you're
broad.
saying any strike that takes place.
Any strike that takes place now from the future, from going forward, as we are now part of their resupply system, we are
Mm-hmm.
complicit. So according to the ICC and international law, you can't do that, especially since we are now seeing, or we have recognized that the strikes against the boats, the suspected drug boats, are extrajudicial and unlawful internationally.
So you're saying there can be legal ramifications for Trinidad and Tobago if this ends up, say, at the ICC
As the ICC.
at
Well,
The
I
Hague.
I just recognized, I saw that just came up on my feed that President Trump has just put sanctions against two ICC court judges.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Pre-
Sanctions against two
Two
ICC
ICC
judges.
judges. Yeah. So,
Oh,
and that's because
on what basis?
they're speaking out against the war in Gaza and Palestine.
Okay. Well,
So that's a,
there was a ICC ruling on that.
yes. So the
So
Israeli
that's not
side,
related to our
not
matter
relate,
here.
not
Okay, okay.
related, but not related to our matter here. But it just shows that he has no respect for ICC judges.
Right. So, well, he did say what the
So
and the ICC is an institution of the UN. So, yes, I understand.
and he's
Okay.
saying, I just glimpsed it. It's because that the ICC court judges are not recognizing the sovereignty of the US. So
Okay.
US sovereign law trumps, I mean, using the pun, trumps all law.
Right.
So we are there. But so forget the ICC, forget the UN. We recognize that the US has that veto power and they're toothless. If it comes to a strike on Venezuelan's territory, Trinidad and Tobago is a collaborator with the enemy of Venezuela, which is the US. So we are an active collaborator, and that's strike active collaborator with the enemy of Venezuela, which is the US, which makes us, and I'm not, this is just a fact. If that happens, we are a legal target. Our airports and seaports are legal targets because we are part of the US supply chain. We
Okay.
are resupplying their vessels, we are resupplying their manpower within the region.
Okay.
And
I.
the
Mhm.
radar itself, and that's specific to the radar is that tool that the US is using to look into Venezuela and strike. So Venezuela, so not thinking about internationally what's happened, we become a legitimate strike for Venezuela. That's the reality.
Okay, I want to shift back the focus to what are the security implications for us in Trinidad and Tobago and for the wider Caribbean, insofar as there are implications for other neighboring. You have the ABC Islands, you have Guyana, that is very close. What do you, how do you see this playing out, and what are the security implications for us?
Okay, so let me broaden the scope and then bring it into Trinidad and Tobago, right? So, with the naval blockade in the Caribbean region, the United States has literally said, listen, your sea lanes and your air lanes, I control your sea lanes and air lanes. That has global implications. That has implications for Chinese vessels passing through the region. It has implications for Russian vessels passing through it, and Cuba. So there are lots of implications because they have now controlled the sea lanes. It means that shipping you're going to have so you know about in shipping one of the most important and basic things that you're going to have for anything to move through a territory is insurance and freight. Insurance is going to go up because you have to insure the cargo, you have to insure the ship. So when insurance goes up, you know what's happening with freight.
So the
You know,
cost of goods coming into this region will
cost of doing
likely go up
business.
because the
Cor-
shipping and the cost of doing business. Okay, this is
Correct.
important to note.
This is
Hmm.
correct, and you would know.
Hmm.
So, so shippers are going because there's an inherent risk that something can happen in territory. Insurance is going to go up for both their freight and their vessels. When that is going to be passed on to the consumer, and it's going to be passed on to the consumer everywhere.
Yes,
So look out for that. We already know that the price of oil has trickled up a bit.
yes, a little bit, yeah.
So they're watching
Hmm.
to see what's happening. The prices has trickled up a bit. China and Russia are saying, listen, the sanction is illegal. Venezuela, the last vessel that actually went into Venezuela, a Chinese vessel, Chinese tanker, and it left with 1.6 million barrels of oil, escorted by 4 Venezuelan destroyers. It's getting active.
Yeah,
So if I'm escorting if I'm being escorted by 4 destroyers through the region, and it escalates, it means that shipping oil and everything that goes in through the area is going to be at risk. So the
right.
tourism industry, you think cruise ships are going?
Tourism, yes, yes. We know I mean, I was in Barbados up to last weekend, and even though they're having the busiest tourism season they've ever had, um, I did talk to some hoteliers who did say that we have had cancellations of people saying, well, there's a lot happening with these military vessels and so on, and so they preferred not to come. Now, that's the longer this takes, the more that's likely to sort of accelerate, I'm guessing.
Yes, it does. But
But do you?
everything in the
Sorry.
world comes through shipping. Everything, shipping is the only international institution. Everything, and everything we buy, all our goods has to come through the sea lanes, and that's how important it is to maintain those sea lanes open. And the freedom of navigation has now been devoid. You have no freedom of navigation again. So it's going to affect everything that you the, up to that sorrel you buy there, the sugar, that's the sorrel, it's going to go up. So prices, we're
What?
going to see prices increase.
Yeah. What about cruise though? Because I mean, I know that cruise is not huge for countries like Trinidad and Guyana, let's just say, but for the ABC Islands, it's big.
Yes, yeah.
What is this going to affect cruise
Uh,
apart from the insurance implication and
it,
maybe
it,
the
it,
fear that some travelers might feel?
so cruise lines are not going to go into a contested area.
Okay.
Cruise lines are going to avoid it totally, and then as I said, insurance goes up. You have your passengers also who are going to be afraid whether or not it's going to go into an island that's close by. So the islands that are close to Venezuela, if something's just as I said, the ABC Islands are going to be affected because they are close by Margarita. Those islands, they're not going to have the kind of tourism and the kind of shipping coming back into their area, because people are going to be hesitant. They're
Yes.
people are concerned, and they're not going to put themselves out there. You know, so it that is sort of going to be like a double-edged sword, because the cruise ships have to work. So you would see marketing gimmicks. You would see
Right.
cruise
Yeah.
prices may plummet,
May
and
plummet. Well,
yeah.
or they redirect the cruise ships and they stay in the northern, Western Caribbean.
But what's going to
I'm
happen to what's going to happen to the islands that depend on them?
Exactly. So the ABC Islands, I think of a lot.
Grenada,
Now, Grenada too, but Barbados as well, because they've been
yeah.
entrenching themselves deeper and deeper in Barbados into the cruise sector. I think about Suriname and Guyana in terms of their oil industry and their oil exports. And of course, I'm guessing most of it leaves on ships. So there will be implications for them as well in terms of where their ships can navigate and the cost of insurance and all of that. I'm guessing
Yes,
they will also be affected.
because
Now,
that Caribbean triangle of trade is very
mhm,
important, extremely important, and that tells you and it shows you why the U.S. has invested in their largest carrier strike group in this area. So the
wow,
economics is at the center. And then if we go back to what the economics is, the economics goes back to oil and gas resources, that resource that Venezuela has. So it falls squarely into your area of expertise, that how
yeah.
the economics
Of
work.
course, and then not just the trade in oil, but also the trade in goods. Like, we in the Caribbean, we depend so much on imported food, imported fuel, but also imported food. I'm guessing this also has implications. We talked about the cost, but even the availability maybe of certain food items, medical items, and things
So
like that.
so much so it goes up. So we
Hmm.
see the larger macroeconomic perspective, and I've shown you the nexus with Russia and China, because
Yes.
Russia helps Cuba, and China is the ones that is actually helping Venezuela by refining their product. So when things goes up, the commodity prices increase. When you drill down and you come back into Trinidad and Tobago, I've already shown that we can't get a handle on our gangs, and Christmas time is coming up. And the reality, the gangs in Trinidad and Tobago, these individuals, they want to go out and party. Carnival coming up. They want to go. So crime is going to escalate. Where
Oh
they're going to get
God.
the money from. So the implications, when you see it and you extrapolate it, you're going to see. So we are in an SOE, crime is still there, and crime is not going down. Crime is going up.
So you're expecting crime to get worse.
Or over this
Okay.
Christmas season, yes,
Yeah,
and
Christmas
coming up,
and Carnival.
which normally happens. It's a normal thing, but I think it's going to
Right.
go up even more, because individuals are not going to be able to pay for the things that they
And
want.
they're being squeezed.
They're being
The
squeezed.
criminals are being squeezed. All right. Okay, so we have to, hopefully the audience is listening and we have to understand that and prepare for that, which of course will have economic complications and implications, because if we're not out and about shopping and doing the things we normally do to the extent that we do, then the economy is likely to suffer as a result. I kind of want to think about, if still, I still want to think about a potential positive outcome here, because there has been, discussion around regime change in Venezuela and perhaps Maduro exiting. Um, what are your thoughts on the likelihood of that happening? And if it happens, are there going to be positive implications for us in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean?
Well, first, I think that's the main reason that our present administration hitched our wagon with the U.S.,
Right.
recognizing that if something comes out of this and there's a regime change in Venezuela, we will benefit from it by those deals that we're talking about, the
Right.
Dragon Gas deal and stuff. So I think that's the main reason
We're all
we have to
counting on regime change.
all counting on regime change, and that the regime change and that the the it, I have to say this, very politically and diplomatically, because
Right.
whoever's installed by whomever, you have to hope that they remain in that particular frame of mind to support the regime installing it. So if the US installs a proxy leader, whoever that be,
Well,
that,
we have an so-called opposition leader who won the election. It's just that it was stolen by Maduro.
so
So
so so
it's not that she's being installed out of nowhere. If
so
she is given the leadership that she earned in a supposedly democratic election, then that's to me a reinstatement of what should have happened from a legal standpoint.
and, and I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm saying is whether or not she will honor and stay with the people that she has set. Because she can change. She can say, listen, here's what I'm going this way, I'm going that way. She may stay in governance for maybe a year or two, and then decide that she's not going to honor some of the dealings. So that's all I was saying. You're hoping that whoever is in place or installed maintains the cordial relationship with the United States.
And let's hope that she maintains a level of governance
Yes,
that would
yes,
benefit the people of Venezuela, and by
because we
extension
because
stability.
we saw that with the nationalism of PDVSA before in the 1976, and we saw Chavez changing it, right? Because we
Right.
agreed that it was a good thing in the beginning, but then Chavez went off and did his thing in the end. So people can change. So we have
Yeah.
positives from it if it changes, and we are betting, we are hoping that goes that way. We are also hoping that there is no act of war and that no kinetic strikes actually happen, so that it is done seamlessly. Transition, either Maduro leaves, he goes in exile, hands over power peacefully. We're hoping that happens. That is the best
Yes.
scenario. The best scenario.
I'm okay. So that's where I will be hoping and praying for now, since you've dashed my earlier hope. But
So
Commander Dindial, we have just 2 minutes left. I want you to tell us, because we have been getting some questions, which we didn't get into a lot of them. But what would you say are the main takeaways for the business audience and ordinary citizens of Trinidad and Tobago? What would you say to them in terms of how do we best prepare mentally and logistically for what's to come?
well, the business society, you need to try to help the people of Trinidad and Tobago and boost that. So see where you can assume the increase in prices. So we know that the business community normally is about a profit margin. But if you're looking at patriotism and helping people at Trinidad and Tobago, try to maintain the price margins, where people can purchase stuff in the future at a reasonable rate. You can still make your
So
profit,
no
but
price gouging, please, people.
yes,
No price
no
gouging.
price gouging, not
Yes,
taking advantage, and because you know
of
how
a
this goes, we
delicate,
take
especially at
advantage.
this time of year when people tend to spend more.
Yes, so we have to focus. We have to come together as a people. It's not about fear mongering; it's building a society. We have to work together because we are in it together. No matter who makes the decision is already made.
Yeah.
We have to work with the reality of the outcome, and we have to work together. We have to come together as patriots and support one another, and especially the business community is one of these things that can support us.
Okay.
Trinidad, for the people itself of Trinidad and Tobago, we're going into this. We recognize that here's what, because of that, you're going to find maybe criminality going up. You may find crime.
Yes.
You have to be very, very safe and cautious during this Christmas season. You need to be very security aware. Lock your houses, lock your doors. When you're going out there, you're going to price mats into the market. Somebody might bounce you. Go to the police station and report
Yeah.
it. Don't stop and come out
Don't
the
stop.
car because kidnappings and stuff.
Yeah.
Those are the things. And then when it comes to, we have our brothers and sisters here um, in Trinidad and
I
Tobago.
have to
And
interrupt you. Sorry, we're really out of time, Commander Dindial, and
so,
I
so let
just
me just, so I just want to say this. Please don't be bigots against Venezuelans that reside here. These people here are migrants.
true.
They're not
This
part of it. You
I
have to
agree.
help them. That's the
I
truth, sir.
agree. It's not them. It's the
Because
regime.
people
So
will try to say,
I know. I thank you so much for your time and for so generously sharing your thoughts and opinions with us on this issue of the US and Venezuela relations, Commander Dindial. I wish you and all of our audience a most peaceful and restorative Christmas and New Year season. And I look forward to the next edition of Finding Our Freedom on January 16th. We'll be back on January 16th, 2026. Take care and see you then. Bye bye.
Namaskaram.